So it looks like Brits, like me, are going back into a situation where we can't play face-to-face, even in masks and socially distanced. And for people like me, who have busy friends and quite a small playgroup, just playing over webcam might not be enough to scratch that Commander itch. Magic the Gathering Online offers a service where Commander games are available with strangers 24/7. This sounds really appealing, but is it the place that we should go to now that we're back in a situation where we can't play face-to-face? Hopefully, today in this video, I'm going to give you some positives, some negatives, and some hints and tips to help you get some good games of Commander on Magic the Gathering Online. By the end of this video, you should be able to decide for yourself whether you want to proceed and get a Magic the Gathering Online account and play some Commander games, or whether it's not for you. Hopefully you find it helpful. Let me know if you like this kind of video, and if you do, hit that like button and subscribe. So I'm fairly new to Magic the Gathering Online, but I have been using it for a little while, and I've been using it recently to play Commander. And I wanted to sort of review my experience so far, and as I said before, give some tips on how to make the process better for you. So what is MTGO, or Magic the Gathering Online, or MODO? I'm not really sure why people call it MODO. Anyway, MODO is a Magic the Gathering trading card emulator. An emulator is the right word. It tries to create a simulation of Magic in the real world, in the digital world. So everything that you can do in the real world, you should be able to do on Magic the Gathering Online. So that includes trade cards and play the game. The emulator also has its own economy and card scarcity built in, is what I want to say. I want to call it card scarcity. That might not be the right word, but I'll explain it a little bit more now. There are only a certain number of copies in the digital world of a sort of Feast and Famine, for instance. So there is an actual economy around the cards. The rarer the card on Magic the Gathering Online, the more expensive it is. So a Sword of Feast and Famine, as my example, there is, 10,000 copies of that sword, maybe more, and therefore it holds a certain price. And if you buy a copy of that sword, or trade for a copy of that sword, you have one of the 10,000 copies. It's not like Magic the Gathering Arena, where it's sort of a false economy, where cards are digitally created when you request them through wild cards or opening packs. Magic the Gathering Online has card scarcity. So it is literally a recreation of what happens in the real world with cards and a digital market and so on and so forth. I don't really want to talk about how to get started in this video. If you like what I have said, and the positives for you are outweighing the negatives, then there's a great video by Seth from MTG Goldfish, which I'll link in the description, of how to get started and all of the things that you need to get started with Magic the Gathering Online. But for now, I'm just going to reduce it to my experience so far of the platform. So should we play Commander on MODO? Well, what are your other options during this time? The other options are webcam games with your mates, but there are some negatives to that because you need a webcam. They're in short supply at the moment because of the current situation. You need the space to be able to film the game, and you need some creativity and potentially a degree in engineering to, finagle, is that a word? Your setup so that it looks good, right? And people can read the cards, and it requires more space and more time than people maybe need or have access to. I have quite a large desk, so I can set it up quite easily, but I can understand that people might not have the space or the equipment to be able to do webcam games. The other downside of doing webcam games is it's restricted to when you can get 4 or more people, not more than 4. Don't play with more than 4. 3 or more people, don't play with more than 4 though. 3 or 4 people together to actually play the game. And all of those people then have to have webcams, and all of those people have to have the proper setup, because otherwise you can't read the cards. And you all have to be arranged. You have to arrange that between your friends, and it's difficult. That is challenging, especially if you have, busy people in your playgroup. So is Modo better for scratching that commander itch? Well, it's different, and there are some big differences and some frustrations that if you're used to playing in person or over webcam, that might be off-putting. So I'm going to go through them now. So the way that I see it, there's two groups of differences. There's a social difference, and there is also a mechanical difference. So the social difference is the way you interact with the players around you or playing with you. And there's a mechanical difference in the way that you actually just play the game. And I've got some subcategories. So the social differences I've defined as followed. Politics, playing with strangers, the meta, and social convention. And the mechanical differences are what I'm going to refer to as the final decision, the shuffler, the board state, and then just the interface and the UI generally. So let's dive into each one of these. First of all, let's talk about the social aspect and the politics of the game. It can be quite jarring starting a game of Commander and not being able to talk to anyone, and the game actually being silent. So the decisions you make about the game aren't really influenced by the players around you in the same way that a face-to-face or webcam game of Commander would be played. The silent games is really weird, actually, for me. I'm a political person, and a lot of the politics of the game are harder to do using Magic the Gathering Online. There is a chat function, which is down the right-hand side of the screen, and using that actually is quite useful. And people tend to respond as well, which is what I was surprised with. This kind of weird chat function at the side. I was fully expecting people not to use that at all, and it never get used, and so on and so forth. But actually, if you ask people a question, they tend to respond, and they tend to be quite well mannered from what I've seen so far. You get the odd person that's a bit salty about stuff, but that happens in face-to-face games as well, so that's fine. So politics is harder. It can be done using the chat function, but it's just strange. And if you're not used to it, it takes a little while to get used to. Playing into this sort of silent game thing is the difference of playing with strangers. So playing with people you don't know, you might be really used to that because you might be playing webcam games with people from a Discord or so on and so forth, and you might not know them very well. However, talking to someone is a good way of getting to know someone. Typing in a little chat box isn't. So it's actually quite difficult to personalize the chat function and put a face to the social interaction that you're having with this stranger. Now, why is this important? Why does this affect gameplay? Because it feels like everyone's being the most malicious they can be. And I don't know whether that's just me, and it could very well be, but it feels very malicious. Every piece of targeted removal or interaction that they have, or when they attack you, it feels quite malicious. And maybe I'm just a negative person, but it definitely felt that way for me when I was attacked or when I was targeted with a piece of removal. Because you can't see this person's face, because you don't know them, it feels very angry, and that can lead to some feel-bads in the game because it's all just a little bit less personal. However, playing with strangers gives you the availability to play at any time. So if you can put up with that, you can play literally any time. You can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and there'll be games of Commander running, and it'll take you a very short amount of time to actually get a game. The next social thing is the meta. So what is the meta like on Magic the Gathering Online? And we'll talk about why this is a little bit later, but the meta tends to be more powerful, I think, than what I see over webcam with my friends. And I think this is because of the prevalence of very expensive cards and very powerful cards in the Magic the Gathering Online marketplace. Cards tend to be much cheaper on Magic the Gathering Online. So it means that most decks and most people can afford a Mana Crypt, a Sword of Feast and Famine, a Mana Drain, and these very expensive cards that can put you ahead in the early game quite easily. And that means that the meta is just faster and more powerful. So it can be more challenging to newer players and can feel a little bit like you're getting drowned by someone's very, very strong deck. The next social aspect of the game that's slightly different is the social conventions that go on. And this one is quite frustrating. There seems to be a social convention on Magic the Gathering Online that you can basically scoop at any time. Your players in the game get a little bit frustrated by it, but there's nothing they can do to you because you are a faceless entity to them, and people just scoop all the time. I'd say 3 out of 4 games, it turned into a 3-player very quickly because someone scooped, and they scoop at instant speed and they'll do it all the time. And I can sort of understand why. It's very difficult to know how long a game is going to go, and if you've got other things going on in your life, then you might need to scoop up and move on. Or the game might be going really badly for you, and you don't want to sit for 2 hours and play a game that isn't doing anything for you. So it's very easy to just be like, oh, I'll just scoop now. And it seems to be that is the done thing quite a lot of the time. So that's frustrating. One more thing about the meta that I forgot to mention was if you don't really want to face the most powerful decks, when you're in the game selection screen, when you're trying to join a game, I suppose the lobby is the better way of putting it, there'll be a description of the game usually underneath where you can join the game. Hopefully I'll show it on screen now. So you can see that some of them have EDH written underneath. Some of them have like preferences for people not playing infinite combos or extra turns, so on and so forth. Don't join a game of CEDH if you don't have a CEDH deck, because you're going to get like stomped. If there's not your specific variety of Magic available, create your own game and give it a little title that tells people what you're doing. So if there isn't one that says casual and you've got a casual deck, just create your own casual game, and it'll take 10 minutes at the longest for that game to fill up. And it tends to be that people respect that, and that's the way of avoiding the really, really spiky decks, or playing with the really, really spiky decks if you want to. So that's the best way of doing it. Okay, I'm going to move on quickly to the mechanical stuff. So the mechanical stuff, the first point I've put down here is the final decision, I'm calling it that. And that is that every single decision you make is final. So if you tap your mana wrong, you can't say to your opponents, oh, can I untap this land and tap this other one because I've tapped out slightly wrong. Every decision you make is absolutely final. And you can't negotiate with the UI. So if you make a mistake, you've made the mistake. You can't go back on anything that you do. And this leads to a few social interactions which are a bit odd. I find that people tend to use removal in a very strange way, and probably not at the right targets all of the time. And I think if they'd had a better look at the board state and we had a conversation about where they could point that removal, they would have pointed it somewhere else. So there's been a few times where I've got countered and I thought, am I the person that you need to be countering there? You know, maybe that's just me, but it certainly plays into your role as a player in the game, is that you can't make mistakes. You have to do everything correctly because there's no takesies backsies. Is that a word? No. The next point is the shuffler. So the way your deck is shuffled feels a little bit weird. It doesn't feel natural, like a natural shuffle would if you were shuffling a deck of cards in real life. And a lot of the games I experience quite a bit of clumping. And maybe I'll do another video on this, and maybe I'll do some more experimentation. But it feels like at certain land counts, your deck clumps your lands together. And I could be completely wrong about this, and it could just be my impression. But I found when I was running 36 lands in one of my decks, the lands clumped together. But when I changed that number to 37, my land draws were much smoother and much more consistent, which is weird. And I don't know whether I'm right about that at all, but it definitely doesn't feel as natural as a normal card shuffle, and it can be a little bit strange. So make sure you're building your decks with that in mind. I think 37 lands was something that I found worked quite well, and I got a good distribution of lands and spells. Again, I could be wrong about that, but that's just my experience. It's much more difficult to read the board state as well, mechanically, even compared to when you're playing on webcam, because you tend to be able to ask your opponents, oh, what's that, and what does that do, and they can explain it to you in a more human way, whereas you have to read the board state, you have to read every single card. If you don't know what a card does, you need to spend a little bit of time reading it and how it might interact with someone else's deck. So it's more difficult to read the board state. The interface and the UI I found were fine. I know there's a lot of complaints online, so if you've watched any Magic the Gathering content that uses Magic the Gathering Online, they'll always complain about the interface and the UI and how it's difficult and not very intuitive. And I think it is in some respects, but I didn't find it the most difficult thing to use. I found it okay. There were a few times where I made some mistakes when I was trying to do something and I misclicked, or I accidentally skipped through my turn or skipped past my combat. So that can be a little bit challenging, and it sort of plays into that thing of the final decision. So if you make a mistake, you can't take it back. It's just, you've just made a mistake. So it's certainly more difficult to use than playing Magic in real life, but I think just with practice, everyone can use the system. It's not too hard to use. You can get some really good games if you use all of the tips that I've just outlined previously, and people are quite friendly, and it is an enjoyable experience so long as you're joining the right games for your deck. And that should be the main thing, is if you've got a casual deck, join a casual game and tell everyone that it's a casual game. The final thing, if you want to get started, you'll have to buy some cards. This is not sponsored or anything, no way near the level of YouTube subscribers or views to ever get a sponsorship, but I use Card Hoarder, and it's a really good system. So, it's very easy to buy cards, it's very easy to trade cards, it's really easy. It's probably easier than real life buying cardboard cards, because there's postage obviously with those cards, whereas here it's all automatic, all online, and it's very easy. There are some weird exceptions to this rule, like Sol Ring is really expensive, it's like $10, whereas obviously in the real world it's, I don't know, very cheap, it's not that expensive. So there is some strange scarcity on Magic the Gathering Online that isn't in the real world, so getting your hands on a Sol Ring is a little bit more expensive. However, basically every other card is cheaper, so, it's a cheap way of getting into the game. There is an upfront cost of like $20 to actually play the game, and you have to purchase that once you've created an account. But that's all in the Goldfish video. So let me know if you play on Magic the Gathering Online. I might bump into you, because I'm going to continue playing at a casual level on Magic the Gathering Online when I've got a bit of an itch to play Commander. And I think the overall experience has been positive. I had a few games where it was really negative, and I just joined the wrong games for the power level of my deck, and just got stomped, and people were, comboing off on turn 4, which is something that my deck that I built on a budget was not going to be able to keep up with. So just keep that in mind. If you like the video, make sure to like the video, subscribe. I've been Minty, also known as Near Mint Gideon, and I'll see you in the next one.